thinking about, okay, what is your part in the choir? It shouldn't be everything. If you're a jazz artist, you shouldn't be learning the a cappella group songs, right? But like kind of thinking, what's your lane? What is sustainable for you? And who are the people you're doing this work with?
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Harton Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Harton Solutions, Mental Health and Behavioral Health Counseling in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our vice president in charge of the behavioral health department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So the mission of our podcast is that we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So we are very excited to welcome our two guests today. They are just two of our favorite people. We just really enjoy having these kinds of conversations with our guests. And we're excited to welcome back Maggie Alton. Maggie was on an episode recently, and as we were having the discussion, we went, oh my gosh, please come back, and so that we can talk more about these systems that we had kind of gotten into, but we'd love to just explore more. So Maggie has her master's in social work. She is certified in aging and longevity studies and helps work individually with clients dealing with anxiety, with depression, with chronic mental health conditions. Maggie is just a wonderful, wonderful therapist, and we get to work with her, and we are so, so happy to have you back on the show. We also have joining us Harsch. Is a licensed master social worker. She has her master's in social work. Also provides telehealth services across the state of Iowa. Is a wonderful, wonderful therapist, and is a wonderful, wonderful advocate in our state for social issues and for social justice. So Em has previously worked with LGBTQ plus students, also provides or has provided gender affirming care and continues to provide that gender affirming therapy for all clients that she serves here. So welcome Em and welcome Maggie. Thanks for being here.
I say thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're really excited to talk about this today.
Wonderful. So we had been talking about these systems that happen, and we've had so much change in our state, in the country recently, that there are just so many things that are happening that are really, really impacting that daily mental health processing, that daily care for our own mental health, because we're being challenged in a lot of ways, and there are just so many things going on. So, what would you say in the last, year or so? What would you say are some of those systematic processes and things that are impacting your clients as well as the mental health of the community members that you talk to?
For me, I think one of the biggest things that I am seeing, really, and this is no surprise, it goes back to basic needs. A lot of what I am seeing is, how am I getting enough food? How am I going to afford rent? A lot of issues with insurance changes or losing insurance, or because of those insurance changes now not being able to afford co-pays, all of that kind of thing. But a lot of what I am seeing in terms of systems is things that are affecting my clients' basic needs. And one of the models or theories that we hear about a lot in social work is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the basic idea of that is, pyramid. If you're my age, imagine the old food pyramid from way back when, because that's kind of what it looks like. But it's this pyramid, and on the bottom is our basic needs: food, water, shelter, clothing, those sorts of things. And then on top of that are kind of those next level things: connection, friendship, and it goes up and up and up. And the basic idea is that if you have kind of shaky ground on the foundation, then it's going to be really, really hard to meet those other needs. It's really hard to have like a sense of belonging, because a sense of belonging requires a sense of vulnerability that you don't necessarily had if you are in survival mode, if you are worried about food and clothing and rent and whatever. And I actually looked it up this morning. As of, I believe the data is from 2022. It was released in 2023. In Iowa, it is 1 out of every 9 adults, and it is 1 out of every 6 children do not have enough to eat. So, I mean, just with that one statistic, and then what I was just talking about, imagine the ripple effects that can occur when you're not getting those needs met.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of, piggyback on that too, I recently actually learned that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs was probably taken from Blackfoot indigenous communities. And so was originally a model of community care, of how do we meet everyone's needs for safety, everyone's needs for food, everyone's needs for shelter, everyone's needs for belonging, and then getting to what does kind of community resilience, community hope, arts look like, and was actually kind of decontextualized from the community into an individualized model. So even that is like an example of some of these systems, how, switching into a big thing that a lot of my clients struggle with is feeling individually responsible for these systemic issues of like, if I'm not out there, protesting every single day or calling my representatives nonstop or doing community food projects, like I am the problem. And so I'm seeing a lot of like values kind of clashes with my clients right now of feeling personally responsible for systemic issues that really are shared responsibilities. And so that's the big thing I see in the therapy room is how do we put the responsibility back in the correct system circle, and also think about how can we personally participate in some of those changes too.
Speaking of piggybacking. So now, yeah, so number one, send me your resources because I want to learn more about that. That is one, I mean, don't me wrong, not cool that we stole that and took credit for it. Not surprising. We've done it a lot. But with that being said, I really want to learn because that makes so much sense to me that it's a community model, and it fits right in with the idea, like you just said, that we are individualizing things. Because even within the model, things like community, acceptance, love, friendship are parts of those higher pieces, and you can't have those without a community.
Absolutely. And thinking of, I think, a couple more specific things that have really changed, I think, in the last year. Um, I work with a lot of queer and trans folks. And so in the state of Iowa, I mean, even like 10 years ago, I had a lot of friends who were moving to Iowa because it was considered a very safe environment for LGBTQ folks. And now we're seeing the opposite, where people are fleeing the state. There's kind of refugee pipelines that are taking place across the country and internationally too for people who are actively trying to leave. So how can you do, the work on, for instance, like family conflict or things like that when you're fleeing for your life? And so that's been, I think, a really big change locally as in the state of Iowa, we're preparing for July 1st for civil rights protections for gender identity to go away, and very likely for that to follow suit for other communities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned like those basic needs being met before even thinking about the bigger problems, like how are they going to be fed and where's their next mortgage payment coming from, things like that. But I'm sure a lot of our clients are focusing more on like the bigger thing and aren't thinking about those basic needs, like where am I going to go and when this happens in July, if that were to happen. How can we support clients with that like basic needs while also still trying to focus on like their bigger issues as well? Because I'm sure that is difficult.
So I know I spoke a little bit about this in the podcast I was in here just a couple weeks ago. But really, I feel like, again, that awareness, bringing home those facts, that information, again, that yes, as an individual, we do have some, control and some accountability, but overall, a lot of the things we're seeing is a systems issue. The fact that and just providing that validation that it's not a you problem, it's a whole global, national big mess that you are trying to survive in. Because just having that validation, number one, can be so, so important because we do, and it makes sense, right? Like if we want to keep people on that more individualistic mindset, we're not it's not like we're sending those messages in our media of, getting together and all of these things. We're not. We're still putting the majority of accountability on individual people. There is still a lot of stigma around actually reaching out. And so just again providing that validation, but then I think also education, helping them to find the places where the resources are, um and for me, part of that is a little bit of kind of the behind the scenes work, me as a provider trying to find those resources that I know are going to be helpful to my clients. But I mean, even everything from the local food bank to like the things that, are quote unquote easy to find, like SNAP. And I say it that way because they don't actually make it easy by any means. You can find it, but actually filling it out is a whole different thing. But yeah, just, being there, helping them with that, helping them, not a safety plan, but coming up with sort of a plan of action, helping them just to get their thoughts down on paper and organized in a way that then doesn't feel so big, so overwhelming. And I think I don't remember if I mentioned this in one of my previous podcasts, but something that has been coming up a lot for me in sessions has been that idea of you can't do everything in a day. Yes, there's a lot going on. Yes, it's so overwhelming, and I'm not going to deny that, but focusing on, just doing something every day is still going to help bring a little bit more of a sense of control, a little bit more of that sense of just self-efficacy too. Like I can do this, I one thing at a time.
Yeah, I think a big thing I've been doing a lot in session is reminding people of their power, reminding people of the choices, their autonomy, their agency. Because really, I think right now a really big political strategy, honestly, is to make people feel very, very powerless, to make them feel like there's nothing that they can do. And so then when we have the bed rotting, right, and like the shutdown modes that are taking place for a lot of people, where people are having trouble getting out of bed, answering an email, responding to a text message, feeding themselves. Reminding people like there are still things that you can do in your daily life. Whether that's, what feels good today, what centers joy today, and working some of those neural pathways of like, you still deserve joy even while all of this is happening. Um, these relationships are really important for long-term survival and also for a lot of people's mental health goals when we're kind of in this very isolated society. So those kind of things have been popping up a lot for me, as well as generating hope for people. Thinking about there has to be an after, there has to be something, to keep moving forward towards. If we can't envision a future where we feel like our safety will be promised, it's really hard to care about, why would I work on my eating disorder, for instance, if I feel like the world's going to end? And so getting people to start to imagine themselves happy in the future, imagining like, what kind of world do you want to live in? And what are the steps that we can take to either make you feel like you're contributing towards that, or getting you to practice the world that you want to see in the future too? So there is space for art, there is space for joy, there is space for creativity, there is space for, well, if future me is going to be still around, what skills do I want future me to have? And can we practice some of those skills today?
Yeah, and it's so many great points. And I think what was really coming through for me as you were talking about um, that kind of that process versus those end result. I think as a community, we're because of the individualism and the individual responsibility that we're kind of conditioned to feel, because that's what makes us successful in school. If I think, hey, if I study more, I'll get better grades, and that's what I'm supposed to do. We're kind of conditioned to do that. So because we've got that outcomes based kind of measure of value, which is, okay, well, I made progress, and so that made the process worthwhile. But if I feel like there isn't a future where that's going to matter, then it can feel like, oh, that process isn't worthwhile. And what it really brings is that, this is an opportunity in history as well, for us to focus on the processes, because even if I'm making strides and I'm taking little steps every day towards building a healthy relationship with food, right? If I'm doing that every day, but I've got that feeling that's like it's not going to matter right? Like, where are we even going to be in 5 years? If I'm only out focused on that outcome, then it is going to feel so disheartening. But if I can also focus on, wait, but in that day, like today, in this moment, when I'm doing something that's kind for my body, like eating a meal, if I'm doing something that's kind for my body, like choosing a glass of water after I've had 10 glasses of coffee, right? If I'm doing something like that, I can still have that either that joy or that feeling of accomplishment or that feeling of peace and progress, even if that outcome never comes about, because doing it in that moment still has value. And I think it goes so well with what Maggie was saying too, where we overestimate what we can do in a day. So then it's like, oh, I didn't get everything done, right? But then we underestimate what we can do in a year. And so but we're so focused on that year, it's always like, well, a year from now, I'll be here, I'll have this done or all that, we're so focused on the future. And it can make it just that much more difficult to be focused on the present and be able to feel the things that we're doing for ourselves, that other people are doing for us, in that present moment. So I think it's so important that you all are talking about this, with your clients and also with the community, because we've gotten so far away from that feeling of, well, in this moment, this is what it is. I always think of this article I read one time, and I have no idea where it was in a magazine or something. And this woman was talking about how her mother had Alzheimer's, and her mother would not remember that she had visited. And so she would go to her mother's house, they would cook a meal together, and they would spend time together. And her mother would not remember as soon as she left the house. And she talked about how disheartening that was, because we do feel like we need a permanence always, right? So like, it's like if I'm going and we're spending the time and we're having this quality time together, it's like we want the outcome of that, right? Which is that in the next moment, we still have the benefit that we just did that. And the fact that her mother couldn't still have that benefit, it really changed how she thought about that process, because she said, okay, but when I'm there, my mother knows that I am there. And when I'm there, I'm having these experiences with her that will live on. And that always comes to my mind when I think about, when I get too far into the future, because my brain will just be, 30 years in the future. And I always think about that. And I go, no, right now in this moment, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at three amazing people that truly care about other humans. And that when I intentionally do that, it does make such a big difference in my wellness. So I love that you guys are focusing on those kinds of things. And you talked about community care versus individual care, which now that I'm looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I'm going, whoa, okay, wait. On an individual lens, Self-actualization at the top means something totally different than it does when we're looking at self-actualization of a society. That's a huge difference. I'm blown away.
I say I was just thinking about, I think it was Margaret Mead who said, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure, who said that in her opinion, the hallmark of like when we became civilized, like we became a civilized society, is that you would start to find remains of, people who passed long ago, but they would have healed broken bones, meaning that there was someone there to care for them when they were vulnerable and had enough resources and ability to actually do so. And yeah, when you put that into perspective, particularly, I feel like given some of the recent beliefs around, that community, that empathy for our fellow man, um, it really kind of puts it into a whole different perspective, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, and thinking about how many of our personal needs are shared, I really struggle to identify, like, I mean, an individual self-care task that isn't tied to other people, right? Like feeding yourself, for instance. Do you have other people in your household who also need to eat? Can that be a shared need and a shared responsibility? Even going to therapy is not necessarily an individual process, right? Like we seek one of the powers of therapy is that you have a really meaningful, non-judgmental relationship. And so it is relational in nature too. And I really like to think about these needs too through like thinking about public health models. There's a kind of a popular story within public health of if there's a community that's all drinking from the same well water and everyone is getting sick and every single person is expending all this energy to go to the doctor and take medication that will help them because they're getting sick from this water. At what time do we pivot from all of the individualized care into what the heck's going on with that well? Do we need to treat the well? And that's, I think, going on right now for many of my clients are having kind of the same things that are going on in their lives, whether it's anxiety and depression as kind of a side effect of a really sick society. We've also got some really great meta-analysis that shows that experiencing racial discrimination and systemic discrimination based on race actually creates a situation where people of color who experience racism present with 70% of the symptomology of trauma, of PTSD. And so, like, okay, if we want to be navigating PTSD, part of it is, yeah, the individual coping skills and understanding what happened to them. Um, but also, at some point, we got to look in the well if we want to stop the need for people to have to require all of this care for quote unquote individualized problems that are really systemic. They're originating from the well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, which kind of a side history note. That's actually one of the ways that they figured out how cholera was spreading way back when was there was one particular doctor, I forget his name, but he started looking at, okay, where are these people at? What are the kind of common areas? And they were able to bring it back to a specific well that was contaminated. People were getting their water and they were dying. And I yeah, our system is ultimately the root cause. And that's not to say that people, in eons before us were like purposely building up. I mean, I could definitely argue that some of the things were purposeful, but also there is just an element of as you are building a government, as you are building a society, there are going to be ripple effects to things that you don't necessarily know, but it absolutely affects people. Like for example, I think it did officially go through. I could be wrong, but I think it did officially go through that as of March 31st, individuals who need to review their Social Security benefits cannot do that over the phone. They have to go in person, Which, if you live in a city, I'm not saying it's not inconvenient. It absolutely is still inconvenient. But if you live in a rural area where your local Social Security office is 45 minutes away, there is no bus, there is no public transportation, and now you do not have a phone option. And then you add in, like, Em said, all that anxiety and depression that comes from all the stuff. How am I going to get this done? How am I going to be able to afford to feed myself? What happens if they cut off my benefits and then I lose my housing? And on you go. And that's just that one little example, that one little ripple effect. And there's so many.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of individual, like obviously you both are mostly individual therapists. Like how can you do like other therapists potentially listening, like using your individual counseling, be able to kind of impact that community and talk to your clients about how to have that impact on the community while still just individually working with a person?
Yeah, so I mean, navigating systemic harm individually, right? Like I think one issue that a lot of folks are having right now is feeling like they can't have needs because it feels like the world is on fire. Like what they're asking for is too much, or it's distracting, or feeling shame around identifying needs. And so that's a big thing that I've been doing in therapy of like, your needs matter regardless of what is going on in the world. And even right now, like if someone, for instance, has some really strong social justice values, I'll tie into like, okay, if you want to be well resourced and prepared for supporting your community, let's take a beat. Let's identify what's the barriers for you, what's going on, what are your values that we can tap into, what are those options that we can tap into, and really trying to reduce shame of no one can do something 24/7. No one can be active in taking action constantly. There's this uh, kind of social justice metaphor that I really have been using with clients a lot of, when you're trying to um, essentially like sing a song of a new world, of thinking of what are the changes you wish to see, and let's imagine that that is a song that you're singing. And if you're a solo artist and you're singing this song and you feel personally responsible for carrying on the song, and you have a cold, or you need to take a break, or you have stage fright that day, or your car breaks down and you can't get to the performance, whatever it may be, the song is going to stop. But if we can connect to a choir, in a choir, it's actually recommended that if you personally are sick, don't show up because other people need to be healthy. If you need to take a breath, go ahead and take your breath. Take as long as you need, with that trust that the song will continue because there's other people doing this work. Um, and so the idea of identify when it's your turn to step up, but also kind of more importantly, when is your turn to step back and center your needs? And what are, if it's shame that's stopping us from centering our needs, asking for something to be met, doing the brave thing and saying, I'm not okay, and I actually need a lot of support right now. Man, that's a beautiful place for therapy. That's a beautiful place for group support. That's a beautiful place for finding, a support system to talk to, um, as well as just doing that self-reflection on like, okay, what do we actually need? What is missing here? Whether it's I need help getting food, or I just need a mental break, or I'm overwhelming myself by scrolling Instagram all day, and kind of thinking about, okay, what is your part in the choir? It shouldn't be everything. If you're a jazz artist, you shouldn't be learning the a cappella group songs, right? But like kind of thinking, what's your lane? What is sustainable for you? And who are the people you're doing this work with?
Yeah, I think you bring up really good points. I like your choir metaphor. I'm probably going to steal that. Uh, because that's the way I always kind of put it with my clients is, yeah, you can't do everything. You are not the whole pond, but you can create those ripple effects. And if there's enough people, enough raindrops who have the ripple effects, the whole thing is going to change. You just can't necessarily do it yourself. And so, but what I kind of really want to bring back is you were talking about, making those connections and building community. And honestly, I feel like whether by our own nature or, by systemic design or what have you, um, that I feel like is like the linchpin. You have to be vulnerable enough to ask for help and have somebody reciprocate it for you to build community. And we have, from all levels, built this really individualistic society where we are so afraid of asking for help, either because, like Em said, that's going to bring up shame of why did we have to ask, or potentially bring up past traumas of times we did ask and it didn't go the way that we'd hoped, or, whatever. Um, but ultimately, it is that vulnerability, which is absolutely the scariest part, but that is what builds the community. You have to be able to be vulnerable with each other. You have to be able to be at that point where you feel like you can rely on each other and build that trust. Um, and yeah, without that, it feels like I have to do everything. And not only that, but it's I have to do everything perfectly. And that's not just unrealistic, that's impossible. It just is. So which then, yeah, throws a lot of people into this really nasty kind of set of self-limiting beliefs, when really what we need, and it's kind of counterintuitive, especially when we're not talking about it at a systemic level, is to allow that vulnerability and actually show it and build the community.
Absolutely. And I think, in times where there is so much chaos, there's so much change happening all of the time, and there are so many constant, very real threats to our society and to our survival. Because there are so many threats, so many of us are feeling vulnerable all the time, and so then it is a big ask to be vulnerable intentionally when we're already feeling so vulnerable just at our base level. And having those, and so that I think one piece that is just, I'm just super interested. I'm like in my head right now thinking about it, but it's that, there are those different kinds of vulnerability as well. And so I think when we talk about vulnerability builds connection, it builds trust. It's what is required to be able to connect truly with other people. There are these different kinds of vulnerability that I can kind of bring to mind. And I think when we say vulnerability, and it takes that vulnerability, it is a different kind than maybe the kind of physical and vulnerability in terms of our acceptance into society, that might be just a constant buzz, right? Just a constant feeling of vulnerability at our baseline. And so then when we're needing to do that intentionally, it can feel like, no, but I don't want more of that, right? I don't want more of that. But it's a different kind, because when we're being intentional about who we're being vulnerable with and what the outcome of that vulnerability is, it can help us to see that vulnerability not as a threat, the way that the other things are threatening us and making us feel vulnerable, but as an invitation to that community and that support, which is exactly what we're needing. And in that way, it's so counterintuitive, because it's like, I don't want to feel vulnerable, so I'm going to make myself vulnerable in a different way with people that I decide I'm going to open up to this person. I decide I'm going to ask this person for help or support, and initiate that conversation. And it is very different when it's a vulnerability that we are choosing for an outcome that would benefit us, versus that like low grade vulnerability that's just there and put upon us because of all the threats that are happening.
Think that highlights one of the biggest differences right now is, we all have the kind of quote unquote day-to-day threats that can absolutely be threatening. I mean, and they fall on a spectrum, everything from a car accident to having cancer, what have you. There are threats, but the threat we see right now is a level of threat on a scale of threat that we as have not seen it like ever in
I
our
haven't in my
lives.
lifetime.
Yeah, I
I
was gonna
haven't.
say I
I
haven't.
haven't felt that level
Um,
of threat. Yeah.
and because of that, your conversation actually brought up, I'm having a lot of conversations with my clients, particularly clients with really complex family dynamics, or who potentially have like some trauma, having conversations about what my vulnerability does look like with these people. I mean, and this is going to sound a little blunt, but, and, obviously I do not condone this behavior, no murder, but, like the first inner circle, the people you really trust, I kind of, from Grey's Anatomy, who are you going to call when you have to bury the body? Like, those are your inner people, right? Those are the ones you would trust with your innermost secrets. And then there's another circle out. And it sounds really calculated and maybe a little cold to be rethinking um our dynamics, not just with family, but with other people too along that line. But like you said, it does really help us to get kind of a bird's eye picture of what vulnerability I am willing to give to these certain people. Where are my lines? And by doing that ahead of time, it can save a lot of, I don't want to say save a lot of discomfort, but it saves you discomfort in the moment. You already have those lines set in your brain. You already kind of know at what level you're willing to meet that other person, instead of having that internal dialogue and potentially that internal argument slash fight, that bickering with yourself on which way you should go. Which then, in the moment, that adds a pressure and a stress that potentially you can deal with beforehand.
And so often too, like, I mean, people are kind of afraid to start new relationships, to put themselves out there in relationships. I think about so many people's traumas are rooted in relationships. And so I think like the protective side of jumping out, like I can't be vulnerable, I can't connect to these people, or I can't share about myself because I did this with someone else and they really hurt me. And that kind of core negative belief of I can't trust other people or other people are unsafe, I think is a big trigger for a lot of people right now of this. I can't trust anyone. Like, who are the people who are threatening me, who are coming for me? And I always challenge people back on thinking like, okay, if trauma comes from relationships that were harmful, the healing also has to come from relationships that are helpful, that are safe. And we can't experience safe relationships without the vulnerability. So, who are those people that you can have kind of a brave conversation with or an uncomfortable conversation with? And also, who are those people you wish you could talk to that maybe you need to navigate conflict resolution or repair? A resource I really love for this is from Mia Mingus and the Bay Area Transformative Justice Coalition. They created a tool called pod mapping, where it's essentially thinking of how like dolphins swim in pods, and it's like dolphins care for one another in these little, micro communities that they create. And humans kind of have separated from that model. It's like it's either your family or it's no one unless you create a chosen family. And so the idea of pod mapping is let's figure out what relationships you have in your life that you can really strengthen and focus on. And in those relationships, be vulnerable. Ask for a need like, hey, I'm not feeling safe today. Can you come over and spend the night with me? Or I really need to shower and it's difficult for me to do that today. Can you like be on the phone with me while I shower? Even though it feels kind of weird, like, the buddy system really helps. As well as who are the people that you trust to pull you back in when you step outside your values? The people who are going to hold you accountable to being true to yourself. Because this model was originally created with actually, how do we stop sexual violence? And the idea is, if you are someone who is maybe being harmed by sexual violence, who are those people, those resources, or potential resources, potential people that you could connect to for support? But also on the other side, if you are someone who is in this cycle of harming other people, like you also need your needs to be supported. You also need people to challenge you towards coming back into community and not being thrown away, but being, accountable to our community members. And that's also, I think, a hard part in navigating what's going on right now is there's a lot of people um, who are kind of values crossing in this moment and having probably some moral injury. And how do we fold those people back into community and provide them the support that they need as well, so we can get back to that community care model as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about shame and the shame that can come up when it feels like, oh, I should be doing more. I should be doing more things about these things that are happening. And that shame of, okay, well, the thing that I'm doing right now, which might be asking for help, it doesn't always feel like it aligns with how we identify ourselves. We might identify ourselves as like, well, I'm a problem solver and I'm a helper and I'm a advocate and so then when we ask for help, it can trigger that shame because it feels like it's going against how we identify ourselves and how we see ourselves. And I think on the flip side, there is a lot of shame happening for people who have maybe supported certain things in the past or have continued to support them. But as they kind of go, they go, this really isn't aligning with who I am as a person or how I feel about the people that I know. So in Iowa, you had mentioned how trans rights are going to be gone they're cut from our state in this summer. And that there are people out there, and it's hard to imagine because it's not as vocal as the people who are out there advocate, like trying to either push this bill through or stop the bill, right? Like these are the voices that we're hearing of politicians and people who are either supporting or lobbying for those politicians. But the quieter voices are those who are going, I voted this way, but my coworker, my cousin, my sister, my daughter, my best friend from my roommate from college is now in a position where they're not going to be physically or emotionally safe in this state. And it goes up against that value of, well, but I care about my family, I care about my friends, and I want that person to be safe. And so I think on the flip side of it too, and I love that you're bringing it up because I think for us in this field, right, we tend to be more on the human rights side of things, right? So we're the ones being like, do not take away civil rights. Um, but I think that because we're so passionate about that, it's very easy to vilify other people who may have supported that for whatever reason and not clearly understood the ramifications for the actual real life people that they know. I think there can be this sense of like, well, those other people, right? But then when it becomes reality, it's like, oh no, wait, that's actually my friend that is now like has to leave the state or is just going to not be safe. And so I think that shame in that way, Brene Brown says guilt is very, very toxic for us. Guilt is I did something wrong. Guilt can be very toxic when it's not applied appropriately, but um, shame can be very, very helpful and also can be very toxic, but it can be super, super helpful when it comes to identifying those values. Because when I say, oh, I feel shame, why is it? Why is it that I feel that shame? And I think that sometimes that shame can convert into anger more quickly than we can process it and understand that there was shame there first, and then it becomes anger. And I think that fuels even more of those kinds of policies that are trying to control and oppress and marginalize people. And so you had talked about you had talked about systemic discrimination when it comes to race. We're now going to be seeing in our state government approved systemic discrimination against our trans clients and community members. So can you speak a little bit more to that and kind of how you are helping people to adapt to that. Because one positive thing is that there are those of us out there that know what is coming, right? We don't like it, but we know that this is coming and we know that it is going to have impacts on our community members. So can you speak a little bit more to that?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think what's something that's kind of a background to this conversation too is, I mean, frankly, how much white people are really struggling in this moment with, like, I think about one of the core tenets of white supremacy culture is individualism and kind of like protect myself and maybe my like chosen couple people above all, and not really having this lineage of relying on community or being able to be in relationship with people with conflict. And so there's kind of this, I'm noticing a lot of like just kind of skills mismatch based in like people whose cultures or their childhood or lineages are really rooted in, no, we take care of all of us, and we all are going to survive together, even though maybe we have some conflict disagreements, like moving past that into deepening values and coexisting. I'm seeing right now a lot of white people really, really struggling. And that's also translating, I think, into this like kind of newer attack on trans folks, that people don't have that lineage of surviving to, or your trans elders are not in your core community. You don't know them. They're not your grandparents. They're Marsha P. Johnson, they're Sylvia Rivera, they're Miss Major, they're people that you don't have direct connection to and can seek mentoring from. Um, so that's, I think, a big thing right now is just lack of generational skills and generational survival for the queer and trans community. So that's something I've really been talking to folks about is how do we get connected to community and learn from the past, look to our lineage of how did people survive this before? Because while this feels like a new threat, it's definitely not. It's not new if historically. For instance, the HIV/AIDS epidemic and seeing the government completely abandon queer folks, and so queer folks having to pull together to bring in allies. There's stories of nurses who would not feed AIDS patients, and so people, volunteers, bringing the food in and sitting with people at their deathbed. And then this kind of story of like, in the mornings we went to funerals, in the afternoons we went to marches, at night we danced, because we need that, the recognition of grief coexists with action and coexists with joy and celebration and community. And so I'm trying to encourage people to tap into that a little bit more of just because we don't have those skills right now doesn't mean we can't build them. But we have no other choice but to build them if we want to survive in the same way that our kind of activist lineages have been doing. So, Maggie, maybe you have some more thoughts on that too.
No, I think you said it beautifully. I feel like that is I was actually before you said it, I was thinking of that and I forget who it was that said it. But yeah, that kind of mantra of, we the funerals and then the protests and then the dancing because you're right. And I think something that we in this society anyway struggle with is the fact, and it seems very basic, I feel like, to those of us who are in the field, but the fact that we can hold space for all those things at once. We can hold space for the grief and space for the that political justice side, that passion, that anger or whatever it is that's driving you, and that joy. And several times as we've been talking today, I keep going back to the saying that joy is a form of resistance, and it absolutely is. And so, and it is absolutely important, imperative to keep joy, to keep hope, because yeah, once you lose that hope, then it is harder. And so it's important to prioritize it as part of, I mean, not just part of your daily lives, but as part of the movement. I mean, in a way, like there is a priority there. Um, I feel like that kind of falls under that self-care perspective. And I know Em talked a little bit about that earlier, but yeah, I need to take a break or I need to do this thing. And knowing that there is a community there to help you. And to be fair, also, something that Em was talking about, and I also agree with, is that there are a lot of individuals, particularly I feel like probably, those who are not part of a marginalized group, particularly, who, yeah, they don't necessarily have the same skills. Now they have to build them, like Em said, but, you know, that is the nail on the head. The reason we don't have them is because we didn't have to build them. It was not, that is the quintessential definition of privilege. It's not that you didn't have obstacles, it's that you didn't have obstacles simply because you were white or a woman or could not walk or whatever it is. It doesn't negate the hardships that other people have. It's just that this is a whole, it's you're playing a whole different game. There's a whole different set of rules.
And if we think a little bit more, we as not just, us in this moment, but we as in a generation and thinking generationally too of, I think of the thought of like some of the things we're fighting for or hoping to see in the world, we may never see. And we kind of have to make peace with that idea of even if we don't see the fruits of this, even if we never sit under the shade of a tree, it's still important to plant the seed and nurture it, fertilize it, support it with the hope that someday someone will. And I think that like tapping into people's values and thinking like, I hope you do get to sit under the shade, but if you don't, it's still worth doing. It's still worth having that hope, even if it's not going to directly benefit you. And that's community care, right? Like, even if I don't get this benefit, someone still deserves it. So let's work towards that future and hope that someone does have that safety and is able to reach, community actualization in the future too. It's still worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for joining us. I feel like we could have kept talking for another hour. There's so much information about these topics, obviously, especially today. But if you are listening and are interested in counseling services with either Em or Maggie, you can find more information at heartandsolutions.net.
I'm Em Harsch, and I need a counselor.
I'm Maggie Alton, and I need a counselor.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236.